Welcome to Create with Tech. In this video, I'm going to walk you through the basics of using FreeCAD, the open source, and as the name says, free computer-aided design application. My goal in this video is to make a simple container with a lid that will be 3D printed. I'm also going to show you how to create a pattern on the outside of the container that will make it a lot more interesting. These are the concepts that I'm going to cover in this video. Number 1, creating a sketch in FreeCAD. Number 2, applying constraints to your sketch. Number 3, creating multiple bodies in the same project. Number 4, padding or extruding your sketches. Number 5, exporting your model as an STL. Number 6, importing the model to the slicer. In this case, we're going to be using PrusaSlicer. Number 7, applying a modifier to your STL model, and we'll do that in order to create a pattern on the outside of the model. Number 8, printing your model and then checking to see how well it turned out. All right, so hopefully you have FreeCAD installed on your computer. If you don't, go to the FreeCAD website and download the latest version and install it. I am actually using a different fork of FreeCAD called Real Thunder, and you can look that up if you want and download it. I will leave the links to the official version of FreeCAD and the Real Thunder version down below. So we're going to start by, first of all, creating a new file, and we are going to create a new body and a new sketch. And we're going to put the sketch on the XY plane. So we click on that and say OK. And now we are ready to create our first sketch for the container. Now, the container that I'm going to be making has two parts. It's got the body of the container and it's got the top of the container. We're going to start by creating the body of the container. And the container is going to be a square container. It's going to be 40 millimeters wide, 40 millimeters long, and the height is going to be 50 millimeters. So we're going to create the container or the sketch for the container by using the rectangle tool here in the sketcher. So we click on that and we create a rectangle. Now, before we go any further, we need to constrain the rectangle. So right now, the sketch still has 4 degrees of freedom, and so we're going to constrain it and make it a fully constrained sketch. So the first thing we're going to do is give some dimensions to the horizontal and the vertical lines. Now, I said that I was going to make a 40 millimeter by 40 millimeter container. So I'm going to make the horizontal line 40 millimeters. Now, I could take the vertical dimension tool here and make the vertical line 40 millimeters. That would work, but an easier way to do it is to just make these two lines equal. So we click on the two lines and we make them equal. The reason that this is better is because if I change this line, it will automatically update this line. Whereas if I use the vertical constraint, I would have to change the horizontal and the vertical separately. All right, so now we have the lines constrained, but we have to constrain the actual sketch. So I'm going to constrain the sketch to the origin point. The way I'm going to do this is by clicking this point here, and the origin point, and then I'm going to use the constrain symmetrical tool to constrain the sketch. And now the sketch is fully constrained, and we know this because it's turned green and because it tells us here that the sketch is fully constrained. So once that's done, I'm going to close the sketcher, and now I am going to pad the sketch 50 millimeters. And I'm going to say OK to that. So now we have a 50 millimeter high by 40 by 40 millimeters cube. Now it's a solid, so I'm going to have to do something to put a hole here, because that's what's going to make it a container. So I click on the top here, and for this I'm going to use the thickness tool. So I click on the thickness tool. It's a badly named tool because it actually puts a hole in a solid. So thickness is maybe not the ideal name, but that's what it's called. So we're going to click on the thickness tool, and I'm going to create a thickness for the container of 2 millimeters. And I'm going to turn off preview here so that we can see what the container looks like. Now, it looks great, but what I don't like about it is the fact that the bottom of the container is rounded. I want the bottom of the container not to be rounded. I just want the fillets on the wall here, the walls here, on the edges. So the only way I can do that is by using the intersection option. The intersection removes the fillets. And what I'm going to do later on is just manually apply the roundness to the edges afterwards. I'm not going to let the thickness do it. All right, so that's done. And now I'm going to apply the fillet to the edges. And the way we do that is by clicking on all 4 edges. Like so. And then going to the fillet tool. And I'm going to make the edges, the fillet on the edges, 2 millimeters. All right, so that's pretty much done. And we'll say OK to that. And we'll just straighten the model out, like so. And we've got the model pretty much done. So this is the bottom part of the container, which is pretty much done. So now we need to continue with the top part. So my idea for the top part is to basically create an insert inside the container. So the insert will go inside the container, and then on top of the insert, I'll have the main part of the top. So what we're going to do here is create another part. So I'm going to start off by first creating a part to put all the elements for the cap of the container. So we've got a part here. And by the way, some people get confused on the difference between a part and a body. So a part is a container. It's just a container. It's like a folder where you can hold all the different elements that make up a particular assembly. Okay, so if you're making something, you can hold all the elements in a part. And that part can be moved around with all the elements within it in one go. So we've got a part here, and inside the part, we're going to put a body, and then we're going to sketch on top here. So we're going to create a sketch. All right, so the first thing I'm going to do is, again, use the rectangle tool, make a rectangle. And since I want the bottom part of the top to be inside the container, I'm going to make this a little smaller than the internal of the container, which is 40 millimeters by 40 millimeters. So I'm going to take the horizontal constraint, and I'm going to make it 39.5. And then I'm going to, again, click on the 2 lines, the vertical and the horizontal lines, and I'm going to use the equal option, and then I'm going to click on the opposite vertices and the origin point, and I'm going to use the symmetrical constraint. And now we have a fully constrained sketch. So we'll close this, and we're going to pad this. Now the padding sort of is outside of the container, and I want it to be inside the container. So the way I do this is by using the reversed option here. I also want the padding to be less than 10 millimeters. We're going to make it 3 millimeters, and we're going to reverse it. So now what we have is the padding, or the part, inside the container. So we'll say OK, and we can see that the part is nestled inside the container, which is what we want. At this point, we're going to create another part using the top of what we just created as a reference point. So we'll click on that, and we'll click on this, and then we will create another sketch. And we're going to use the rectangle tool again. And since I want the top of the lid to be exactly in line with the container, I'm going to make these constraints, the horizontal and vertical constraints, 44 millimeters. Because the inside of the container is 40 millimeters by 40 millimeters, I made the thickness 2. That means that we have to add 4 millimeters. So in total, we have 44 millimeters. Again, I'm going to use the equality constraint, the equal constraint. So we've made the two sides equal. I'm going to click on this vertice and this vertice and the origin point, and I'm going to constrain symmetrical. I'm going to close the sketch, and then I'm going to pad it. And I'm going to make the pad 4 millimeters. And we almost have a complete container with a top. The only thing I have to do now is add the fillets, which I'm going to do by just clicking on the edges. And by the way, you need to hold Control down in order to be able to click on each one separately without losing it. So I've got all 4 edges highlighted. Now I'm going to go to fillet, and I'm going to make it 2 millimeters. And now we have a fully finished container. And that's it. The only thing that's left to do now is to name all the parts, because you don't want to get confused later on. So I'm just going to quickly name everything. I'm going to call this body container. And I'm going to call this part lid. And you should name all the different parts that are inside in each of the bodies. But I'm not going to do that now. But you need to make sure you name everything so that you don't get confused. And that's it. So the next thing we're going to do is take this container to the slicer and then print it out. Now, before I do that, I just want to show you how to export it as an STL. So let's just export the body first. So we click on it, we go to File, Export, and it will automatically export the container part as an STL. So we'll call this container final. And we'll now export the lid by clicking on the body and getting rid of it, clicking on the lid and clicking on it and going File, Export, and we'll call this container lid final. We'll save it, and that's it. Now we're going to take it to the slicer and apply a pattern to it and then print it out. So now I'm going to show you how to add an interesting pattern to the outside of the container. And to do this, we're going to be using PrusaSlicer. If you don't have PrusaSlicer installed on your computer, I'm going to leave a link to download it in the description below. So let's bring the container into PrusaSlicer, and then we're going to add a modifier to the container. Now, let me just say that this is probably one of my favorite functions in PrusaSlicer, because you can do all sorts of creative things with modifiers, and you can really make interesting 3D prints with these functions. And you can use it in many different ways, not just on containers. The limit is really just your imagination. So if you're not familiar with this already, I think you're going to be really amazed. So the way we bring a modifier into PrusaSlicer is by clicking on the model and then going to Add Modifier. And there are a number of different options. I'm going to choose a slab in this particular case. And then I'm going to go here and I'm going to change the Z size of the modifier. So right now it's at 26 millimeters, and I'm going to change it to 20 millimeters. So now we have a modifier that is 20 millimeters tall. I'm going to add another modifier, and I'm going to do the same thing to it. So add modifier, slab. I'm going to move it up a little bit, and I'm going to make it 20 millimeters, just as I did with the other one. So there we go. So now we have two modifiers that are intersecting the container. I'm just going to place them a little bit more precisely. I'm going to move this one up a little bit. So just find where you want it. I'm going to move this one up a little bit more. And there we go. So we've got the modifiers intersecting the containers, or the container. So the magic is going to happen now, because you need to add a couple of things to each of the modifiers. So you need to add infill, and you need to add layers and perimeters. All right, so let's change the fill density to 15%. And let's change the fill pattern to gyroid. Gyroid is one of my favorite patterns, so I'm going to use that. Then we're going to go to the next modifier. We're going to do the same thing. We're going to add infill. We're going to add layers and perimeters. And we're going to change it to 15% in terms of fill density. We're going to change it to gyroid. We're going to get rid of the bottom solid layers. So we're going to go and say 0, 0, 0. And we're going to do the same thing to the previous modifier. We're going to essentially tell the printer not to print any bottom layers. We're not to print any perimeters, and not to print any top solid layers. And now when we slice the container, what we have is an interesting pattern on the outside of the container. And this will look great when it's printed. And of course, you can change the fill pattern to give a different look. So let's say we change it to something like cubic. Now we have a different look. So you can see here we've got more of a cubic look. And if we change it to 3D honeycomb, we'll have a completely different look again. So as you can see, this is a very powerful function, and you can do some really interesting things with it with your 3D prints. So I'm going to just change it back to gyroid and slice it. And now the container is ready to be printed. So I'm going to print the container, I'm going to print the lid, and then, we're going to come back and see how it turned out. Alright, so that's how you make a container in FreeCAD. It's very easy, very simple, and it's a great way to start learning how to do computer-aided design. So if you enjoyed what you learned here, please don't forget to hit the subscribe button and the notification bell. Subscribing to the channel is very helpful to me, and I would really appreciate it. So until next time, take care. Go out and design something, go out and print something, and most importantly, go out and have some fun. Bye-bye. Damn, this works really well. I like it.